You won't believe the horrifying reality behind the CandyMan, a malevolent spirit summoned by saying his name 5 times in front of a mirror. This legend was based on a terrifying true story. A story so terrifying that it will make your blood run cold. This is the true story behind the CandyMan. CandyMan was born out of the suffering and despair of an old town known as Cabrini Green. It was that place which gave him his haunting identity. The CandyMan was a man with a hook for a hand, a horrifying figure that would appear in mirrors and brutally murder anyone who tried calling his name. CandyMan's victims would be found covered in bees, an identity left behind by the vicious killer to instill fear in people. But this symbolic gesture was much more than a trademark. The CandyMan legend is unlike any spooky story. It's a reflection of the injustices that have plagued communities like Cabrini Green for generations. The residents of Cabrini Green were often neglected by the government and left to fend for themselves in a world of poverty and violence. And in this environment, the CandyMan feasted on their collective fears. The real-life CandyMan murders were never solved, and to this day, the killer remains unknown. His unhinged life caught the eyes of several books, movies, and TV shows who featured the legend of the CandyMan. In recent years, a new CandyMan movie has been released. The film is a reminder that the CandyMan legend is still very much alive, and that the ghosts of the past continue to haunt us in the present. What actions do you think birth such vicious creatures? But the CandyMan legend is not just a product of our imaginations. It's a reflection of the real-life horrors that have plagued communities like Cabrini Green for decades, a neglected town that took its own revenge by breeding its own notorious character, the CandyMan, and it will continue to haunt the people to feast on their fears. Now, the people think twice before calling on the CandyMan and mocking him. They know what horrors await them. Chicago's Cabrini Green projects were a complex of shadows and horrors, but no tale chilled the blood quite like the CandyMan, a name you dared not speak, not 5 times in front of a mirror, because that's how he gets you. Hook glinting in the candlelight, a razor smile stretching across his face. The CandyMan would smile at your call. The CandyMan was real, and Cabrini Green was his playground. The people who thought they were safe with the lights on were only mistaken by their own ignorance, because in the dark, all it took were 5 little words. But it wasn't until the first CandyMan murder that people began to take the haunting seriously. The 18-year-old victim was found in her apartment, her body covered in bee stings. The police found a message scrawled on the wall in her blood: "Sweets to the sweet, farewell to the flesh." From that point on, the CandyMan came to life, the most notorious serial killer in Chicago's history. He would leave his victims gruesome corpses covered in bees and a message scrawled with their own blood. The mysterious killer wasn't caught by the police. He still remains the epitome of horrors for some and an unknown killer who got away for others. One thing was certain: his haunting tale was enough to instill fear in people. As the murders continued, so did the investigations. The police were being pressured to give accounts for all the murders. There was nothing they could say except they were sorry for the losses. Their only lead was that all of the victims had some connection to the Cabrini Green housing projects. They were either residents or had some kind of affiliation with the community, but this lead got them nowhere. A young woman named Helen Lively took on the CandyMan investigation after a while. Helen had heard about the CandyMan while researching urban legends. Intrigued, she decided to investigate the legend and its origins. Her research led her back to the cursed town of Cabrini Green, where she met a woman named Annie Marie McCoy, whose son had been abducted by the CandyMan. Annie Marie told Helen about the CandyMan, a man named Daniel Robatelli, who had been brutally murdered after having an affair with a white woman. According to Annie Marie, Daniel had been a talented artist who had been commissioned to paint a portrait of the wealthy and powerful woman he was having an affair with. But when her father found out, he brutally beat Daniel to death and replaced his hand with a hook. Her father was so enraged that he covered the dead Daniel with honey and let the bees sting out whatever was left of him. His body was no longer his own. The only identity that was left of him was that shiny hook. Robatelli died, and CandyMan was born. Robatelli's spirit was said to haunt the Cabrini Green housing project ever since. Helen finally had enough and decided to call on the CandyMan herself. The determination to prove the myth was enough to go through with her plan. She stood before the mirror, staring at her own reflection, ready to debunk the horrifying mystery. But to her horror, the CandyMan appeared before her, his hook hand dripping with blood. Nobody knows what happened to Helen after that. Some say that Helen was possessed by the CandyMan's spirit and went on a killing spree. Others claim that she was framed by the police, who wanted to cover up the true nature of the CandyMan's crimes. Robatelli died, but the CandyMan lives on, instilling fear and fascination in every person. And while real-life murders may be a thing of the past, the legend of the CandyMan continues to haunt us, a reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the shadows of even the most seemingly ordinary places. The Cabrini Green housing projects were infamous for their poverty, crime, and violence. Their crime and poverty brought upon them this unforgiving monster whose only job was to haunt and kill. There was no remorse in this being, only a sense of manslaughter and resentment that he carried as he kept on killing left and right. All of the townspeople were scared to death after the CandyMan brutally murdered his first victim and left him in bee scars. Their first suspect was a local beekeeper, but this was just to calm their racing thoughts. They knew deep inside this wasn't the work of any human. CandyMan, a name not many got to say and left alive to tell the tale. His murders were some of the most horrifying crimes that ever occur in the Cabrini Green housing projects. Would you be scared if you lived in Cabrini Green? The victims were found with their throats slashed and their bodies covered in bees. It was not a sight anyone could bear. The eyes gouged out, slashes on the body, and a sickly smell of honey marked the presence of the CandyMan. The mysterious CandyMan slipped the hands of the police. Every time they got close to another breakthrough, something mysterious happened which left them all in confusion. Most officers left that case midway and later reported to have intense fever and headaches. All of these instances point back to the same old town of Cabrini Green and the notorious CandyMan. This haunting spirit left some as bee-covered corpses and others in extreme paralysis. His hauntings left a mark on each and every person in the town. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel if you are enjoying the video and want to see more like this one. Today, Cabrini Green has undergone significant changes. The high-rise buildings that once stood tall have been torn down and replaced with newer, more modern apartments and condos. The area has undergone a gentrification process, attracting new residents and businesses. Even though the Cabrini Green housing projects are gone, the memory of the CandyMan remains a haunting presence, a reminder of the darker side of human nature and the horrors that can arise when fear and desperation take hold. People are left with many questions and unsettling thoughts. Was the CandyMan real, or simply a figment of the collective imagination of the Cabrini Green community? Did he truly have supernatural powers? Or was he just a man driven to madness by the horrors of his surroundings? Let us know what you think in the comments. Does he exist within us today? A question many ask themselves. If crime and flawed justice was the thing that made him come to life and wreak havoc on the people, he might still be alive and looking for a gap to terrorize the people again. What terrorizes people more than a creepy CandyMan is a haunting house that left several YouTubers in shock. It is not your average horror house.